I returned from the war, and my family asked, "You survived?" We were counting on the death benefit. At that moment, I realized there were no illusions left in my life, and I decided, if they need my money that badly, they will get a spectacle that will ruin their lives faster than any disease. I'm 30, and over the past 10 years, I've learned one thing. You can only trust your body armor and the comrades standing next to you. Family, however, is a minefield that is never fully cleared. I'm Ethan. I joined the military right after college because I didn't want to stay home, and my father, Robert, had always seen me as nothing more than a mistake to be hidden. My mother, Brenda, always sided with him, and my sister, Taylor, and her perpetually unemployed boyfriend, Blake, lived as if I were a cash cow who had inexplicably stopped producing milk. Throughout my deployment, they never sent me a single decent letter, only a couple of postcards where the message was always the same. "When are you done over there, so you can send us some money?" I was supposed to return home a month ago, but my return was delayed due to a promotion and a $300,000 bonus. $300,000. It was my chance for a new life. I planned to come home, toss them an envelope with the keys to my new downtown apartment, pay off all their old debts, and disappear forever. I thought that upon seeing the money, they would finally start to respect me. How naive, right? On the day I arrived, I didn't call ahead. I wanted to surprise them. I wanted to see their joy. I wanted them to give me a genuine hug for the first time in my life. I walked into the house. I tossed my military beret onto the kitchen counter and placed my duffel bag on the floor. Silence. My mother was the first to emerge from the kitchen. She froze, her eyes wide as saucers, and then the words tumbled out. "Ethan, you survived?" She didn't manage to finish the sentence as my father, Robert, came out of the living room, followed by Taylor and Blake, who was holding her hand. My entire body tensed up. I didn't feel the fatigue from the flight. I didn't feel the joy of being home. I only felt an icy emptiness. The surprise I had dreamed of turned into my personal disaster. Their faces were pale, but it wasn't the shock of happiness. It was disappointment, so palpable and unconcealed that it seemed to hang in the air. I wasn't a hero returning with honors and cash. I was a problem that had refused to die. I was about to open my mouth to tell them about the promotion and the bonus, but my father beat me to it. He nervously averted his gaze and swallowed. "Son, maybe you should ask for a contract extension? Don't you get some extra bonuses if you stay a little longer?" Taylor and Blake nodded in unison, their eyes alight with an unhealthy interest. They looked at me not as a son or brother, but as a bad check that needed to be cashed before it expired. In that moment, standing before them, I understood. They had been waiting for me to die. They were counting on my military life insurance, on the $400,000 paid out to the family in case of death. They had already divided that money, already planned how to spend it. My survival had ruined their plans, and I felt something cold and calculated begin to boil inside me. I leaned against the door frame, clenching my fists to hide my trembling, and exhaled as if I couldn't catch my breath. I uttered the words that should have been a death sentence, but for them, they sounded like a Christmas bell. "I can't extend my contract. I was sent home for medical reasons. Burn pit exposure. They found a rare form of cancer linked to toxin exposure on the range. Doctors give me no more than a month, maybe 45 days if I'm lucky. I'm truly sorry." My mother's face first contorted into a grimace of horror, and then, just for a split second, I saw relief, pure, unadulterated relief which she immediately tried to hide. "Oh, that's just terrible, Ethan," Taylor whispered, covering her face with her hands, yet her eyes peeked out and greedily studied mine. My father, Robert, came over and patted my shoulder, but there was no warmth in his touch. "The main thing is that the insurance is in order. They have to pay out to grieving families, don't they? I remember you saying it was around 400,000? He didn't even ask about treatment. He asked about the money." I nodded, feigning weakness. Inside, everything twisted. They were already dividing my skin. I had lied. I didn't have cancer. I was perfectly healthy. But their reaction during those first 5 minutes home, after a whole year away from them, was the trigger that flipped my world upside down. I realized the best way to take revenge on these people who had wished for my death was to give them hope for easy money, let them go too far, and then snatch that hope away. I pretended I needed to lie down and collapsed onto the living room sofa. A couple of hours later, when they thought I was asleep, I overheard voices from the kitchen. I listened as my mother, Brenda, in a quiet but triumphant voice, said, "400,000. That's enough to cover Robert's debts and give Blake the startup capital for his business. Finally, my wedding will be properly funded," Taylor added excitedly. Blake laughed. "Yeah, old girl, we'll be rich soon. Only 30 days left." I closed my eyes. They had given me a deadline, 30 days. Well, this was going to be the most tense and brutal month of their lives. Ethan, who had returned from the war, knew how to fight a war on the home front. And it was just beginning. I had to gather evidence so they couldn't weasel their way out of it. I had to make them lose absolutely everything. I wasn't dying of cancer, but I was dying inside from their bottomless greed. I spent the first week playing the role of the terminally ill soldier. While in secret, I documented their every vile whisper, watching them dismantle their own lives piece by calculated piece, just to get their hands on my non-existent death benefit. They were so blinded by the money, they couldn't see the noose I was weaving. The first week was all about performance. I had to sell the lie, and I sold it hard. I became a master of subtle, debilitating weakness. I'd stumble into walls just often enough. I'd spend too long in the bathroom, emerging breathless. My favorite touch was the staged cough. I'd go to the kitchen, grab a paper napkin, and cough violently into it, making sure it was loud enough for them to hear. Then, I'd subtly fold the napkin, but not before allowing a glimpse of the dark red stain I'd applied beforehand. It was just a little prop blood I'd bought online, mixed with coffee grounds for texture, but the effect on them was immediate and deeply satisfying. Every time I did this, their faces would flicker. Fear for a second, not for me, but for the payout, followed by that quickly masked, hungry anticipation. I also needed intel. The first thing I did was download a secure, professional-grade voice recording app onto my phone, the kind used for remote interviews. I set it to record automatically whenever I was in the main living areas. My old military training kicked in. You document everything. You leave no loose ends. My father, Robert, was the most transparent. Within 72 hours of my diagnosis, he approached me with a stack of papers. "Son, just some family paperwork. To make things easier when the time comes. Just standard forms, power of attorney stuff, financial authorizations so we can manage things for you." I pretended my hands were too weak to hold the papers straight, using the moment to briefly angle them towards the camera on my phone, which I kept strategically placed on a nearby bookshelf. I recognized the letterhead. It was an application for a substantial loan against my life insurance policy. $100,000. He needed my signature to access the benefit early, effectively using my anticipated death as collateral. I looked Robert in the eye, trying to gauge if there was any flicker of shame. Nothing, just impatience. "Whatever helps the family, Dad," I wheezed out, forcing a weak smile. I signed it, making my signature shaky and messy, mimicking a man whose motor skills were failing. What they didn't know was that by doing this, Robert had just committed federal insurance fraud. He'd signed off on documents that asserted a terminal diagnosis he knew was false, using my policy information without my real consent. I now had the signed document and a recording of him pressuring me to sign. Checkmate. The next few days were like watching a slow-motion car crash of poor financial decisions fueled by pure greed. Blake, Taylor's boyfriend, was the first to fall. I came back from a staged treatment appointment, which was actually just me renting a luxury penthouse downtown with my $300,000 bonus, and heard loud, boisterous laughter coming from the garage. Blake walked in carrying a cardboard box. "Why work when we're rich in 3 weeks?" he announced to Taylor, not realizing I was home and standing right there. I listened from the doorway as he replayed a voicemail he'd left for his former boss. He sounded drunk on confidence. "You lazy sack of sh*T, you didn't even bother checking my CV. And I faked half my degree and certifications. Enjoy finding a replacement." Idiot! Taylor shrieked with fake alarm. Blake, you shouldn't say such things. And then giggled maniacally. I quietly slipped away. Not only had they financially crippled themselves by relying entirely on my death, but they'd also exposed multiple acts of fraud and gross incompetence. Blake quitting his job meant they had zero income coming in. Then came the funeral planning. One evening, I was fumbling through the coat closet when I saw a brightly colored binder on the top shelf. It was Mom's, Brenda's, labeled in neat script, Ethan's Celebration of Life. I took it to my room, heart pounding, and flipped through the pages. She'd already picked out the cheapest casket option, particle board with a thin veneer, proudly advertising its budget package status. There were quotes from funeral homes that offered to let the life insurance pay the invoice directly, so they wouldn't have to front any cash. Taylor was listed as the sole eulogist. Most chillingly, there were neat columns showing how the $400,000 payout would be split, complete with deductions for funeral costs and an emergency fund for a potential family trip. My mother was literally planning my death, treating it like a shopping trip. The only thing that kept me sane was my secret life. Every afternoon, when I told them I was going for chemo, I was actually driving my new, fully paid-off Mercedes-AMG to the underground parking of my penthouse. I spent my days furnishing the apartment, signing the lease, and just living. I was healthy, rich, and planning my revenge. It was the ultimate cold-blooded duality. They were so deep in their delusion, so close to the finish line of the payout, that I decided to twist the knife, just to see how brittle their fake grief was. I brought it up casually at dinner that night, pushing the food around my plate like a man with no appetite. The doctor said something strange today, I murmured, watching their faces. My white blood cell count is actually improving. He said the cancer might not be as aggressive as we first thought. Taylor's fork clattered loudly onto her plate. Clang. The sound echoed in the sudden silence. What? She choked out, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I mean, doctors can be wrong, right? Let's not get our hopes up, yeah? Blake quickly added, his voice tense. False hope is cruel, man. We should prepare for the worst. It's better that way. Robert and Brenda just stared at me, their eyes wide with poorly concealed panic. The disappointment was back, 10 times stronger. The idea that I might live terrified them more than the thought of me dying ever did. I just nodded slowly, letting the silence hang. Prepare for the worst, they said. They had no idea how right they were. The game was accelerating, and the stakes were higher than they could possibly imagine. My time limit of 1 month was winding down fast, and they were already so deep in their criminal enterprise that there was no way out. The first week was over, and the clock was ticking. I needed more evidence. I needed the final, damning move. The masks were completely off. They weren't just plotting to steal my death benefits anymore. They were accelerating my timeline. When I found the emergency cash my father had raised by cashing out his entire retirement savings, forfeiting $80,000 to a penalty, I knew they were desperate. But the chilling discovery of a grainy residue in my morning coffee, the very one my caring mother had brought me, revealed the horrifying truth. They weren't waiting for cancer to kill me. They were actively trying to help it along. The second week hit like a sledgehammer. My comment about the potential improvement in my health had sent them into a spiral of financial panic. They'd already factored the $400,000 into their present-day decisions, and the possibility of a delay, let alone my recovery, was not an option for them. The escalating tension became almost unbearable. I had to maintain the act of a rapidly declining man while navigating a household of 4 people who now viewed me as a ticking time bomb, one that needed to go off on schedule. The first major red flag came from my father, Robert. He'd always been a tightwad, guarding his 401k like it was the Holy Grail. One morning, I overheard him on a frantic phone call in his home office. The door was slightly ajar, and my phone, set to record in my shirt pocket, was capturing every word. Yes, I know, 40% penalty, but I need the liquidity now. The timeline has been accelerated. We can't wait another month for the life insurance to process. I need $80,000 today. Send it to the offshore account. I froze. He had cashed out his entire retirement fund, losing $80,000 in penalties, just to get access to cash. Why? Because the loan he took out against my policy, the $100,000, had to be paid back before the payout, or the whole scheme would collapse under an insurance investigation. He was betting his entire future on my timely death. Later that same day, Taylor, my sister, dropped her own bombshell. I heard her sobbing to Blake in the kitchen, not the fake, theatrical sobs she used around me, but genuine despair. I dropped out, Blake. Final semester. $60,000 in tuition wasted. Mom said we needed the money for the deposit on the venue now before someone else took it. We're married in 3 weeks. And if Ethan lives, we have nothing. No degree, no job, no wedding. Blake tried to calm her, but his voice was strained. Just hold it together, baby. It's only a few more weeks. Just keep telling him how tired he looks. Keep the narrative strong. They had all sacrificed something real and valuable. Their safety net, their education, their careers, based on the certainty of my death. They had boxed themselves in, and the only key to escape was my demise. This was no longer just opportunistic greed. It was a desperate, self-inflicted siege. The true escalation came on Thursday of that week. I woke up with a staged coughing fit and came out to the living room, wheezing for effect. My mother, Brenda, who had barely looked at me all week, suddenly approached me with a cup of coffee and an intensely concerned look. I made you a special cup, dear. It will help you rest. You look so frail. Her voice was sickeningly sweet, laced with a false tenderness I'd never heard from her before. She watched me. She stared at me, every muscle in her face tense, waiting for me to take a sip. Every military alarm in my head screamed danger. I brought the cup to my lips, pretended to take a large gulp, and then managed to spill a little onto my shirt, quickly apologizing for my shaky hands. I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm just so weak. Let me try this on the couch, I murmured. She hovered until I was settled, giving me a final, unsettling pat on the leg. The moment she left the room to go back to her meticulous funeral planning binder, I dumped the entire contents of the mug down the nearest potted plant, rinsing the ceramic carefully with a bottle of water I always kept near me. What I saw at the bottom of the cup made my blood run cold. It wasn't just coffee. There was a faint, fine, grainy residue that hadn't dissolved, clinging to the bottom. It looked chalky, bitter, wrong. They weren't waiting for my fabricated cancer to take its course. They were trying to speed things up. I took a photo immediately. My hands were shaking, not from weakness, but from pure, incandescent rage. They weren't just morally bankrupt. They were attempted murderers. I didn't call the police. Not yet. I needed absolute, undeniable proof, not just suspicion. I carefully scraped the residue into a small, sealed plastic bag, labeling it with the time and date, and hid it deep inside my military bag. That night, I called my old buddy, Tristan, my former platoon sergeant. He was now a defense contractor working stateside. I gave him the whole story, leaving out no detail. The lie, the disappointment, the loan, the fake credentials, the funeral binder, and finally, the coffee residue. He listened in silence. When I finished, the line was quiet for a long time. "Ethan, you need to get out of there. Right now," he said, his voice hard and low. "No, not until I have everything. They've committed multiple felonies. Insurance fraud, identity theft, and now attempted assault. If I leave now, they'll lawyer up, claim I was delusional and suicidal, and walk away clean. They need to be caught in the act." Tristan sighed, a sound of heavy resignation. "Document everything. Every single conversation, text, piece of paper. Stay calm, and for God's sake, don't let them see you're on to them. And Ethan, don't become them." His words, "don't become them," echoed in my head as I started making my final preparations. I couldn't just disappear. If I walked away, they'd find another mark, or keep spiraling into worse decisions, perhaps even falling prey to the loan sharks my father had undoubtedly borrowed from. The plan was clear. I had exactly 1 week left to set a final, undeniable trap. I started setting up tiny, covert recording devices, a pen on the kitchen counter, a cheap clock on the dining room shelf, where they plotted their next moves. I was turning my family home into a high-security evidence locker. They thought I was a dying asset. They were about to learn I was a soldier on a mission, and the endgame was fast approaching. I am being poisoned. The lab results from the coffee residue confirmed it. A high dose of prescription sedatives, enough to suppress the breathing of a sick man. They weren't just waiting for me to die. They were actively managing my death with a timeline measured in days. But the game was changing. I set up a final lethal trap, a meeting with a hospice social worker, an insurance auditor, and a notorious loan shark, all scheduled at the same place, at the exact same time. Now, the agonizing choice I face isn't about survival, but about whether to let my father, Robert, take the fall alone, or expose my sister, Taylor, and my mother, Brenda, to attempted murder charges, destroying the last vestiges of my past for the sake of brutal justice. The fourth week began with the kind of dread you can taste. Tristan had helped me anonymously send the coffee residue sample to a private lab for analysis, bypassing the official channels to avoid tipping off the family. The results came back just yesterday. Crushed sleeping pills, high-potency sedatives, enough to cause a fatal respiratory event in someone they believed was already compromised by terminal cancer. This wasn't just recklessness. This was a deliberate, calculated attempt to eliminate me quickly and quietly. I had been spending my staged chemo appointments meeting with a detective, Morris, and an insurance investigator, Evelyn. I showed them the signed loan application, the recordings of Blake admitting to fraud, Taylor's texts about venue deposits, and the shocking lab report. The combined weight of evidence was overwhelming. The attempted poisoning is solid evidence of felony assault, possibly attempted murder, Ethan, Detective Morris stated, his face grim. The fraud is federal. We can move in now and arrest Robert and Brenda on multiple counts. Blake and Taylor will face conspiracy charges. But I had to set the ultimate trap. I needed to ensure there was no ambiguity, no way they could claim I was delusional. I needed witnesses to their final, collective greed. First, I called a hospice organization, feigning a need for end-of-life care consultation for my family. I scheduled the social worker, Marguerite, for Sunday at 2 p.m. I stressed that I wanted the whole family present. Next, I called Evelyn, the insurance auditor, informing her that my father had scheduled a crucial meeting to finalize the life insurance details. I suggested 2:15 p.m. on Sunday. She agreed. The timing was perfect to catch Robert in his most fraudulent performance. But the most volatile element was the debt. Robert had borrowed money from someone dark, someone dangerous. I had captured snippets of his calls. Thick Eastern European accents, casino background noise, and threats of taking payment in other ways. The loan sharks were coming for their money. I managed to intercept a text message on Robert's tablet, a device he left charging in the kitchen, which was a final, chilling confirmation. Sunday, 2:30 p.m. Bring cash or collateral. The convergence was set. 2 p.m. Marguerite, the neutral hospice social worker, arriving to discuss my impending death. 2:15 p.m. Evelyn, the insurance investigator, arriving to question my father about the fraudulent loan. 2:30 p.m. The loan sharks, arriving to collect their payment. 2:40 p.m. Planned Detective Morris and his team, moving in for the arrests. The family was excited about the Sunday meeting. They saw it as the final hurdle before the $400,000 was released. They prepped their faces, rehearsed their grief, and ignored my genuine weakness. This is where the dilemma hit me, a punch to the gut that was more painful than any lie. The charges against Robert, insurance fraud, identity theft, and Blake/Taylor, conspiracy to commit fraud, were clear. But the attempted murder charge? That fell squarely on my mother, Brenda, for the coffee. Yet, Taylor's text messages to Blake, which I'd also captured, had suggested finding a stronger way to shorten the wait, an action that legally made her a co-conspirator. I could choose to protect Taylor. She was my little sister, the only person I shared childhood memories with. If I downplayed the poisoning evidence, claiming I only suspected something or that Brenda acted alone, Taylor would likely face only fraud and conspiracy, the same charges as Blake. She might serve less time. But if I went with the full truth, including the lab reports and the intercepted texts where Taylor encouraged speeding things up, she would be facing a severe sentence, decades in prison, potentially the same as my mother. Do I choose brutal, comprehensive justice? Or do I protect the last shred of my family by letting my sister get away with an intent to kill? I sat on the couch, the tiny wire on my chest recording my labored breathing. If I exposed Taylor, I would be destroying the entire unit, eliminating any chance of reconciliation down the line, if there ever was one. If I protected her, I would be living with the knowledge that I let someone who plotted my murder walk free, essentially making me a co-conspirator in a cover-up. I called Detective Morris back, my voice barely a whisper. Sunday, when the arrests happen, I want you to know this. I have documented everything. I will testify to everything. No deals, no favors. Just follow the evidence, no matter where it leads. I was choosing justice over blood, a necessary sacrifice. My family had been dead to me the moment they asked if I had survived. Now I was just making it official. The stage was set for Sunday at 2 p.m. I just had to survive the next 48 hours and watch them deliver their own final eulogy. The living room became a cage. The hospice worker was discussing my final wishes while the insurance auditor grilled my father on felony fraud. But the real explosion happened at 2:30 p.m. when the loan sharks showed up. I watched my family, my father, mother, sister, and her fiancé, get stripped of their fake grief and expose their greed in front of 3 witnesses and multiple hidden microphones. The look in my sister's eyes as she finally understood who the real snake in the grass was will haunt me forever. My death was a lie, but the price they paid for believing it was brutally, devastatingly real. Sunday arrived, thick with a palpable tension. My family members were dressed in their funeral best, their faces set in expressions of strained, somber anticipation. They bustled around me, making sure I was comfortable, their movements sharp with suppressed excitement. I sat on the couch, the tiny wire taped to my chest feeling like a brand, monitoring the silence. At exactly 2 p.m., the doorbell chimed. Marguerite, the hospice social worker, walked in, radiating professional calm. She began the consultation, asking gentle questions about my pain levels and my wishes regarding resuscitation. My mother, Brenda, jumped in immediately, her voice cracking with forced emotion. We just want him to be comfortable. We've managed his medication so carefully, just trying to ease his suffering. She looked directly at Marguerite, practically daring her to ask about the coffee. At 2:15 p.m., the doorbell rang again. Evelyn, the insurance auditor, entered holding a large, ominous folder. Robert went gray. The mood shifted from somber grief to naked panic. Evelyn wasted no time, sitting down opposite Robert. Mr. Thompson, I need to discuss the $100,000 loan taken against Ethan's policy. Our records show the login access and the forged medical documentation were filed from your laptop. Robert stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. He was too weak. I was just helping my son. Marguerite, the social worker, stopped writing and looked from Robert to me, her professional veneer finally cracking. And then Taylor, blinded by the fear of losing her wedding fund, screamed the one thing I needed to confirm everything. It's all a lie, Robert. We were just trying to survive until the payout. You were the one who told us he was practically dead when he came back. Clang. The final piece of evidence slammed into place. At 2:30 p.m., the black SUV pulled up, its arrival perfectly timed. 2 men in expensive, ill-fitting suits swaggered to the door. Detective Morris and his plainclothes team, waiting across the street, would have seen them clearly. Robert saw them through the window and utterly collapsed. They're here. The collection agency. I told them 2:30. He wailed, burying his head in his hands. Before any more secrets could spill, the front door burst open, and Detective Morris, followed by 3 uniformed officers, flooded the room. Police, we have a situation. Everyone, remain where you are. We are investigating fraud, identity theft, and attempted assault. Chaos erupted. My mother shrieked, instantly realizing the depth of the betrayal. Robert just sat there, frozen in fear, realizing he'd scheduled his debt collector's visit right into a police raid. But the most devastating moment was Taylor. She looked at Robert, at Brenda being subdued by an officer, and then she turned to me. The realization dawned on her in horrifying slow motion. The weak coughing, the waxy pallor, the vague statements about my health. It was all a performance. My eyes met hers, and I didn't flinch. You're not sick," she whispered, her voice laced with pure, distilled hatred. "It was you. You set us up." The look in her eyes was one of utter annihilation, a profound grief for the money, the wedding, and the life she'd forfeited based on my lie. I didn't answer. I just watched as Detective Morris gave the order to the officers outside to detain the loan sharks who were now arguing loudly on the lawn. The cycle of crime surrounding my death was officially broken. The climax was not a gunshot or a heroic escape. It was the quiet, methodical sound of handcuffs clicking into place. Over the next month, the justice system moved with agonizing speed. Brenda, my mother, was charged with attempted murder due to the lab reports and her recorded admission to Marguerite about the sedatives. Bail was denied. Robert faced federal charges for insurance fraud and identity theft. He sold his brother's last remaining assets to make bail, losing his family, his retirement, and his freedom, all for a payout he never got. Taylor and Blake were charged with felony conspiracy to commit fraud and lesser assault charges due to the text messages and their clear intent to financially benefit from my death. They made bail but were placed under strict protective orders forbidding any contact with me. Taylor lost her degree, her fiancé, and her future. I cooperated fully with the prosecution, accepting a deal for limited immunity regarding my false statements about cancer. In exchange, I had to repay the $100,000 loan amount plus penalties. It was a fair price for my freedom, my life, and the brutal truth. I sold the family house, put the money into an escrow account for my legal fees, and moved permanently into my penthouse. I was financially secure and physically safe, but utterly alone. My last official interaction was with Detective Morris, who asked me why I had done it this way, the risk, the theatrics, the complexity. "Why all the performance, Ethan? You could have just told the truth the day you came home." I looked out the window at the cityscape, free of a single military star or family picture. When I came home, they didn't see a son. They saw disappointment. They didn't mourn the person I was. They celebrated the money I would become. I gave them what they wanted, the ultimate asset. But they forgot one thing: an asset can fight back. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy. I am alive. I am free. But the face of my sister, Taylor, as the full, cold reality of her mistake sank in, that look of pure, destructive hate mixed with self-pity, that is the final debt I carry. I ruined their lives because they were prepared to ruin mine, but I also burned down my only past. Was it worth it? I have a comfortable penthouse, a six-figure bank account, and the deep, silent knowledge that I am a survivor. But every morning, I wake up to absolute quiet, and I still don't know the answer. The war may be over, but I am the last casualty, a man who traded family for justice, and in the end, only found a lonely, hard-won peace.